We now come to Amendment 5, with which it will be convenient to consider the amendments and motion to transfer as set out on the selection list. Luciana Berger to move Amendment 5.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move Amendment 5 and will also speak to Amendments 6 and 7. And I'm incredibly grateful to colleagues on all sides of this House for the constructive negotiation and discussion that took place to enable this section and grouping of amendments to be discussed on the floor of the House this evening. The purpose of these amendments is to extend the debt respite scheme set out in Clause 7 and 8 to people in receipt of NHS mental health crisis services. And I'm incredibly grateful to a large number of MPs, 81 from both sides of this House, who are supporting these amendments today. And it's been a real privilege to work with the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, and again colleagues from all parties, to put these amendments together today. It was in the Conservative Party manifesto last year that the government made a commitment to introduce a breathing space. The government since brought forward the bill and launched a consultation into how a breathing space initiative would work in practice. This included proposals for a possible trigger point for accessing support, with the initial suggestion that a breathing space should only be available for a person who seeks regulated debt advice. And while I very much welcome the spirit of the government's breathing space initiative, I'm concerned, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it does little to protect the thousands of people in mental health crisis who are too unwell to physically go and seek that debt advice or to pick up the phone to make that call. We know that according to research from the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, that up to 23,000 people in England alone struggled with problem debt whilst they were hospitalised as a result of their mental health last year. This group of people are likely to be receiving calls, texts, letters from banks, from their local authorities, from other creditors at a time of acute distress, and they are at risk of falling into further financial difficulty as a result of increased fees and charges.
I know there are honourable members leaving, but there's a bit of chatter, and it would be, I think, very good to listen to. Luciana Berger.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very concerned about those charges on people's debt and particularly the drop in income from loss of wages and benefits that people find themselves in because they're in that inpatient care or in crisis care in the community. We know that thousands more people in the devolved nations or who are receiving mental health crisis support in the community will be in that similar position. That additional anxiety and stress that people will experience as a result of these financial pressures not only threatens to undermine people's recovery, but makes it much less likely that they will be able to repay their debts in future. The requirement for people in this situation to seek advice before they can benefit from breathing space creates a barrier that, Madam Deputy Speaker, must be removed if the new scheme is to fulfil its purpose of protecting the most vulnerable customers. The amendments today, Amendment 5, is the first step towards rectifying this. It would ensure that when the Secretary of State seeks advice from the new single financial guidance body on the establishment of a debt respite scheme, this includes advice on specifically how it will protect recipients of mental health crisis services and what services shall be considered to be those mental health crisis services. We propose that this should include psychiatric inpatient facilities and community crisis teams. Amendment 6 takes us further by ensuring that the regulations to establish the debt respite scheme specifically provide protection and help to individuals in receipt of mental health crisis services, irrespective of whether those individuals have formally accessed debt advice. And finally, Amendment 7 would provide the baseline definition of what an NHS mental health crisis service is. Targeting these interventions towards people with mental health problems will have far-reaching positive consequences. People experiencing mental health problems are significantly more likely to be in financial difficulty than the rest of the population, and half of people in problem debt are also experiencing mental ill health. The number of people receiving NHS crisis care services is also likely to be relatively small, and a high proportion, at least a quarter, of people are likely to be in that financial difficulty. Further to this, we know that people experiencing a mental health crisis are likely to experience problems with their cognitive and psychological functioning as a direct consequence of their illness, and therefore are highly unlikely to be able to seek debt advice and access breathing space through regulated debt advice. So how will this work in practice, Madam Deputy Speaker? We suggest that a person entering the care of a psychiatric inpatient facility or crisis team in the community would be supported to access breathing space if appropriate. And this could take the form of a certificate or a stamped and dated letter confirming that the service user is in receipt of mental health support during a crisis and should have breathing space applied. We know that many mental health clinical professionals are currently fighting fires before they can help their patients with their mental health. We know that they're writing to creditors, they're calling bailiffs, they're completing reams of financial paperwork. These changes that we're proposing today would simplify things for mental health crisis professionals, allowing them to focus on their day job. And it would also reduce demand on our mental health services, as research shows that people who aren't in problem debt are much likely to recover more quickly and are less likely to experience mental health problems in the future. It's important to acknowledge that the changes we are proposing would not apply in Scotland, because there already is a debt arrangement scheme in place in Scotland, which would require separate legislation to amend. However, we hope that the successful implementation of our proposals could provide the case for similar reforms in Scotland. But in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, taken together, I give way to the Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and in the interests of time in allowing others to speak, I wanted to just confirm that the Government does recognise the motives and the wide degree of support behind this and the particular issues for those experiencing mental health crisis. And we will commit to ensuring that people receiving NHS treatment for a mental health crisis, either as a psychiatric inpatient setting or in the community, will be provided with an alternative mechanism to access the breathing space scheme, and we will see that this is developed concurrently with the main breathing space scheme.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful for the Minister's intervention, and I want to thank him for what he's just shared with the House today, because what he's shared has been missing so far, and I'm really grateful for what he said, because that will make a very tangible difference to what we know is at least 23,000 people every year in this country, and I'm very, very grateful for the commitment that he's made just now. I was going to say in conclusion that those amendments that I had and we have put forward would prevent those tens of thousands of people experiencing a mental health crisis from missing out on the protections that breathing space has to offer, which I welcome, because they are too ill to seek that debt advice. And again, I welcome what the Minister said, because it's incredibly critical that this group is not ignored and is included, because they are the most vulnerable group. I just conclude by saying that yesterday, myself, the Honourable Member for Plymouth Moor View, and Martin Lewis of Money Saving Expert, joined two people with lived experience, Lee and Susan, to hand in a petition of over 10,000 names of people across our country to support this campaign. This really is a truly cross-party effort, and again also with my colleague, the Right Honourable Member for North Norfolk. Together we've obviously campaigned long and hard on this particular point, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, mental health does not discriminate. And one day it could be one of us in this chamber that would need access to a scheme like this and could make a difference to any one of us. Again, I just welcome what the Minister said. It is very, very welcome. And I'm grateful that the Government have acknowledged that to ensure that the scheme reaches everyone that needs it, particularly those people that are most vulnerable, and how we can best tackle and bring together the impact of mental health and debt and really seriously address it. I'm very grateful for what the Minister has committed this afternoon.